Today's story is about a medicine that doctors believed was saving lives. At first, it looked modern, safe, and ordinary enough that no one had any reason to fear it. But then patients who took it began dying in a way doctors could not explain. And by the end of this episode, one hidden detail inside that medicine bottle will completely change the way you understand the word cure. This is the Body Files from the SCP Labs podcast. Let's get into today's story. On a fall afternoon in 1937, a federal inspector walked into a narrow alley in East St. Louis, Missouri, looking for a bottle that a woman had promised him was already gone. She had told him she destroyed it. But by that point, the inspector had learned not to trust the word destroyed until he saw exactly what it meant. So he stepped carefully through the alley, scanning the ground near the wall of the building until he saw a small glass medicine bottle lying there in the dirt. And when he bent down and picked it up, he could see there was still red liquid inside. It smelled sweet. It looked harmless. But the inspector knew that if a child found that bottle before he did and drank what was left inside, there was enough medicine in there to kill them. Tonight's story is called The Raspberry Cure. In September of 1937, a mother in the United States sat beside her little girl, Joan, and watched her try to swallow. Joan had been sick for a couple of days, and at first it had seemed like the kind of illness children got all the time. Her throat hurt, she had a fever, and she had that tired, heavy look children get when they are too uncomfortable to play, but not sick enough, at least not yet, for anyone to panic. So Joan's mother did the ordinary thing a worried parent would do. She called the doctor. And when the doctor came to see Joan, the scene probably did not feel dramatic in the way people imagine medical emergencies. There was no ambulance outside the house, no frantic rush down a hospital corridor, and no nurse shouting for help from the doorway. There was just a sick child, a worried mother, and a doctor trying to make a little girl feel better. The doctor checked Joan's throat, listened to her breathing, and then gave the family a medicine that looked almost cheerful. It was a red liquid in a small bottle, and it had been flavored so it would be easier for children to take. According to the label, the medicine contained a drug called sulfanilamide, which at that time was not some fringe treatment or strange old remedy. It was one of the most exciting drugs in the country. Sulfanilamide belonged to a new class of medicines that could fight dangerous bacterial infections, and doctors had already used it safely in tablets and powders. For people with infections that might have been deadly only a few years earlier, sulfanilamide could feel like something close to a miracle. And so when Joan's doctor handed over a liquid version of this medicine, nobody in that room had any obvious reason to be afraid of it. In fact, the liquid form seemed like an improvement. Tablets could be hard for children to swallow, powders could taste awful, and any parent who has tried to get medicine into a sick child knows that sometimes the battle is not just treating the illness, it is getting the child to take the treatment at all. But this medicine had a sweet raspberry flavor. So Joan's mother measured out the dose, brought the spoon to her daughter's mouth, and watched her swallow. And for a little while it probably felt like the problem had been handled. The doctor had come, the medicine had been given, and now all Joan had to do was rest. That over the next several days, Joan did not get better. At first, that may not have seemed too alarming because infections can move slowly, and children can have rough nights even when they are on the road to recovery. So when Joan began saying her stomach hurt, her mother might have thought the medicine was upsetting her belly, or that the illness was just taking longer than expected to pass. But the pain did not settle down. It deepened, and then it spread into this relentless sickness that no one in the house knew how to explain. Joan began vomiting, and she grew weaker in a way that probably made her mother keep touching her forehead, checking her face and listening for every small change in her breathing. And then something happened that, at the time, may not have sounded like the central clue to the whole mystery, but it was. Joan stopped urinating. To a parent watching their child suffer, that might have seemed like one more frightening detail in a week that was already frightening. But inside Joan's body, something catastrophic was happening. Her kidneys were failing. The organs that were supposed to filter waste out of her blood were being damaged so badly that her body could no longer clean itself. And because no one knew what was damaging them, no one knew how to stop it. Over the next days, Joan's pain became unbearable. Her mother would later describe the little girl tossing back and forth, crying out in pain, and screaming in a way that stayed in the family's memory even after the house became quiet again. And that is one of the worst parts of this story, because to everyone in that room, this still must have felt like a medical mystery with no shape. A sore throat was not supposed to become kidney failure. A doctor's prescription was not supposed to make a child worse. And a bottle of sweet red medicine was not supposed to turn a family home into the place where a little girl died in agony. But that is what happened. Joan died. And her mother was left with a little grave, a house that no longer sounded the same, and one question that had no answer yet. How had medicine done this? Around that same time in Oklahoma, a physician named Dr. Calhoun was beginning to ask a version of that same question. Dr. Calhoun was not new to death. He had been practicing medicine long enough to know that sometimes a patient did not recover, even when the doctor did everything right. He had sat beside beds, spoken quietly with families, and watched illnesses win. But this was different. Because in a very short span of time, 6 of his patients died after taking a medicine he had prescribed. And that meant Dr. Calhoun was not just grieving for the people he had lost. He was facing the possibility that his own prescription pad had become the thing that killed them. At first, the pattern was not obvious. One patient would come in with an infection and Dr. Calhoun would prescribe a modern medicine that was supposed to help. Then, days later, the family would come back or send word that something was terribly wrong. The patient had severe stomach pain, then vomiting, then weakness, then this frightening failure to pass urine. And after that, the decline could become very fast. Some patients became confused or almost unconscious, some convulsed, and then the family would be left trying to understand how an ordinary infection had turned into a death sentence. The symptoms did not look like a normal illness, simply getting worse. They looked like poisoning. But that made no sense because the common link was not spoiled food, bad water, or something dangerous inside one family's home. The common link was medicine. And not just any medicine. It was a new product called elixir sulfanilamide. By October 11, 1937, the American Medical Association began receiving reports from doctors in Oklahoma that several patients had died after taking an unfamiliar liquid, sulfanilamide product. And at first, the main question was not even how many people had died, because no one knew that yet. The question was simpler and more frightening. What was inside this bottle? So the American Medical Association asked for samples of the product, and they asked the manufacturer for the formula. And as those early reports were being examined, another doctor, this one in New York, heard what was happening and alerted the Food and Drug Administration. An inspector from the Food and Drug Administration office in Kansas City then confirmed that 8 children and 1 adult had died after taking a product with the same label. Elixir sulfanilamide, made by the Massengill Company of Bristol, Tennessee, and Virginia. And at that point, the story stopped being a strange cluster of local tragedies. It became a race. Because bottles of this red liquid had already been shipped all over the country, and they were not sitting in one warehouse where someone could simply lock the doors and stop the damage. They were on pharmacy shelves. They were in doctors' offices. They were in family medicine cabinets. And some had already been poured onto spoons and swallowed by people who thought they were taking something that would save them. Federal inspectors rushed to the company's offices in Bristol, Kansas City, New York, and San Francisco. They found out the company had already sent telegrams to salesmen, druggists, and doctors asking them to return the product. But there was a huge problem with those first telegrams. They did not clearly say the medicine was killing people. They did not say, "Stop using this immediately because patients are dying after taking." They asked for the product back, but they did not carry the kind of terror the message needed to carry. And so, at the insistence of the Food and Drug Administration, a much stronger warning had to go out. This time, people were told to take up every bottle immediately because the product could be dangerous to life. From there, the search became massive and almost impossible. The Food and Drug Administration assigned nearly its entire field force to the case, and inspectors began working through shipping records, drugstore ledgers, sales slips, doctor's notes, and prescription files. In one establishment alone, they checked 20,000 sales slips by hand. And that detail is important, because this was not a modern recall where a company could send a text alert, check a computer database, and immediately identify every household that had received a product. This was 1937. A prescription might have only a first name written on it. A bottle might have been sold to someone passing through town. A family might have moved, or the pharmacist might remember the face but not the address. So the inspectors were not just looking for bottles. They were looking for fragments of people. A first name on a slip of paper. A doctor's half-legible note. A salesman's route that might lead to a town where somebody, somewhere, had a deadly bottle sitting beside a kitchen sink. And all the while the inspectors knew that time mattered. Because if a child had already been given the medicine that morning, the poison was already moving through that child's body. If a doctor had handed a bottle to a patient the day before, that patient might not look poisoned yet. And if a parent believed the medicine was safe, then every new dose given out of love could push the person closer to death. In East St. Louis, one inspector tracked down a woman who had received a bottle. When he asked where it was, she told him she had destroyed it. That should have been reassuring. But the inspector pressed her. He asked what she meant by destroyed, and eventually she explained that she had thrown the bottle out of a window into an alley. So he went outside and searched the alley himself. And that was when he found the bottle lying there still intact, still holding enough sweet red liquid to kill someone. In South Carolina, another inspector heard about a lumber mill employee who had died after visiting a doctor and receiving what the family described as red medicine. When the inspector reached the man's home and asked for the bottle, the family told him it was not there anymore. After the man died, they had followed a local custom and placed his medicines and sickroom utensils on his grave. So the inspector walked with them out to a wooded mound of fresh earth. And there, sitting on the grave among the dishes and spoons, was a bottle with a weathered prescription label. It was elixir sulfanilamide. And when the inspector kept digging into that doctor's patients, he learned that 4 of them had died. At this point, investigators had the pattern, but the pattern was horrifying because it was scattered everywhere. The patients lived in different states. They had different doctors, different infections, different families, and different lives that should never have intersected. Some were adults, but many were children who had been given the medicine because a liquid was easier to swallow. And yet, once the symptoms began, their final days looked disturbingly similar. Within about a week or 2 after taking the medicine, they developed crushing abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, weakness, and then kidney failure so severe that their bodies stopped producing urine. Then came confusion, then convulsions, and for many of them, death. Doctors could see the damage happening, but they did not have a treatment that could reverse it. And so families were left in rooms where the medicine bottle still sat nearby, watching a person they loved die from something no one had yet fully named. But there was still one part of the mystery that did not make sense. Sulfanilamide itself was not supposed to do this. Doctors had used sulfanilamide safely before in other forms. It had side effects like any medicine, but it was not known for suddenly killing patients across the country in this exact pattern. So if the red liquid was causing these deaths, then the active drug might not be the real killer. The killer might be something else in the bottle. Based on what investigators later established, this is how the medicine became the poison. In June of 1937, a salesman for the Massengill Company reported that doctors in the southern United States wanted sulfanilamide in liquid form. That request made sense. A liquid sulfanilamide would be easier to give to children, easier for doctors to prescribe, and easier for pharmacists to sell to families who did not want to fight with tablets and powders. So, inside the company's laboratory, the chief chemist and pharmacist, Harold Cole Watkins, began trying to make it work. The problem was that sulfanilamide did not dissolve easily in ordinary liquids. So Watkins needed a solvent, something that could hold a powdered drug in solution and turn it into a smooth liquid medicine. Eventually, he found one that seemed to solve the problem perfectly. The powder dissolved, the mixture looked right, and once raspberry flavoring was added, it had exactly the kind of pleasant taste that would make doctors and parents more comfortable giving it to children. The company tested the product for appearance, taste, and fragrance, but they did not test the new formulation to find out if it was poisonous. And in 1937, the law did not require them to. That is the part that feels almost impossible now. A company could create a new liquid version of a powerful drug, ship it into the market, and not prove first that the liquid itself was safe for human beings. So, the bottles went out. Doctors prescribed them. Pharmacists sold them. Parents gave the medicine to children, trusting that the people who made it must have checked the obvious thing first. But hidden underneath the raspberry flavor, underneath the red color, and underneath the reassuring label, was the substance that was destroying people's kidneys. It was diethylene glycol. Diethylene glycol can look deceptively harmless inside a medicine bottle. It can have a sweet taste, and it can dissolve certain substances well enough that, to someone focused only on the physical appearance of the product, it might seem useful. But inside the human body, it can be devastating. It damages the kidneys, and once the kidneys begin to fail, waste builds up in the blood, the nervous system begins to suffer, and the body can spiral into pain, convulsions, and death. That was why Joan's sore throat had become a fatal illness. That was why Dr. Calhoun's patients were dying after ordinary prescriptions. And that was why people scattered across 15 states were suffering the same strange collapse without ever being near one another. The illness was not spreading from person to person. It was not hiding in the air. It was not a new infection moving across the country. It was sitting in a spoon. And now all the earlier details meant something different. The raspberry flavor was not just there to make the medicine pleasant. It helped disguise a poison. The liquid form was not just a convenient improvement over tablets and powders. It was the reason the poison was there at all. And even the word elixir, which made the bottle sound old-fashioned and trustworthy, became part of the legal aftermath in a way that was almost absurd. Because under the law at the time, the Food and Drug Administration could not simply seize a drug because it was dangerous and untested. That authority did not exist yet. Instead, the government had to pursue the company on a technical charge: misbranding. The product was called an elixir, and legally, that word implied an alcoholic solution. But elixir sulfanilamide contained no alcohol. It was a diethylene glycol solution. So one of the government's strongest legal tools against a medicine that had killed children was not the fact that it had killed children. It was that the label used the wrong word. As the recall continued, federal, state, and local officials worked with doctors, pharmacists, newspapers, radio stations, and the American Medical Association to find as many bottles as possible. Inspectors followed leads across the country, and they did not just stop when someone said the bottle was gone. They looked in homes, checked graves, searched alleys, tracked salesmen, questioned pharmacists, and kept moving from one partial clue to the next. And in many cases, they arrived in time. A bottle was taken before another dose could be poured. A doctor was warned before writing another prescription. A pharmacist pulled the medicine before the next parent walked through the door, asking for something to help a sick child. But they could not undo what had already happened. The company had made and distributed hundreds of shipments across the country. By the end of the search, most of the medicine was recovered, but not all of it had been found before patients drank it. more than 100 people died. Many of them were children. After the disaster, Harold Watkins, the chemist who had created the liquid formulation, died by suicide while the legal fallout was still unfolding. The head of the Massengill Company publicly expressed regret, but he also said the company could not have foreseen the result and did not feel responsible in the way the public wanted him to. And that response made the outrage even worse, because to grieving parents, to doctors like Calhoun, and to the inspectors who had been pulling deadly bottles out of alleys and off graves, the horror was not only that a mistake had happened, the horror was that the mistake had been legal. Before this disaster, American drug law did not require a company to prove that a new drug formulation was safe before selling it. The government could act after a tragedy, but it did not have the same power to stop the tragedy before it reached the public. And elixir sulfanilamide showed the country what that gap in the law actually looked like. It looked like a mother giving her child a spoonful of medicine. It looked like a doctor prescribing a trusted drug in a new form. It looked like a little girl screaming in pain while her kidneys failed. And it looked like an inspector standing in an alley, holding a bottle that was still dangerous, even after someone thought they had thrown it away. In 1938, the United States passed the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. For the first time, manufacturers had to provide evidence that new drugs were safe before they could be sold. That law became one of the foundations of modern drug regulation in the United States. So today, when a new medicine has to be tested before it reaches a pharmacy shelf, part of the reason is what happened in 1937. Part of the reason is Dr. Calhoun watching patient after patient die and realizing the prescription itself might be the link. Part of the reason is federal inspectors racing across the country trying to find every bottle before another family opened one. And part of the reason is Joan and the other children like her, whose parents thought they were giving them a cure. A quick note about this story. It is based on real historical events, but some scene details are reconstructed for narrative clarity. This episode is not medical advice and is not a substitute for professional medical diagnosis or treatment. This is the SCP Labs podcast.